Hi, Year 8. So, we've now finished the point of poetry unit, and you've submitted your work for your teacher to have a look at. And we've got 1 week to go till half term, including 1 screen-free day. So what we're going to do is have a brief interlude over this week and look at a brilliant story by Edgar Allan Poe. There he is, looking rather grim, before we move on to our next unit that will begin after half term. Okay? So, make sure you're distraction-free. Make sure you've got a pen and make sure you have some paper. First of all, let's start with a little bit of retrieval. So if you could pause the video here and answer those questions. Good luck. Alright, well done guys. So answers to question 1. What are one of the reasons we learned about as to why people write poetry? So first one, argue for political and or social change. Second one, to explore the universal human experience of grief and loss. Third one, to capture the human experience of important moments in history. Fourthly, help us understand the lives and experiences of people from different cultures and traditions. Okay, you can give yourself the mark if you picked one of them or a version of them, and that's an approximation. Okay. Number 2, what is symbolism? The use of symbols to represent bigger ideas of qualities. Example, number 3, what does a caged bird symbolize? Imprisonment, confinement, lack of freedom, being controlled by others, sadness, etc. And then finally, which R means to make changes to something, especially in institutional practice, in order to improve it. The answer, of course, is reform. We looked at that word when we looked at the poem Chimney Sweeper. Okay. Ooh, look at that great image there. After half term, we'll be looking at a new topic, explorations in evil and eccentricity. Okay, so this week we're going to explore a short story to whet our appetites with that rather cool notion that we're going to explore after half term. So, Edgar Allan Poe. Doesn't look like the happiest chap, does he? So he was only alive for about 40 years, and he was the son of itinerant actors who died when he was a child. John Allan, a tobacco exporter from Virginia, adopted him. When business interests took Mr. Allan abroad, little Edgar there accompanied him and lived in England and Scotland from 1815 to 1820, so you're talking a couple of 100 years ago. He received a good education, which was continued after his return to America. In 1826, he went to the University of Virginia, which he had to leave after 1 term when his foster father refused to pay his gambling debts. So he clearly had a bit of a checkered past. For a long time, Poe's literary work was denied its due appreciation in Puritan America, a very strong Christian America, because his work was identified with a dissolute life, which means a chaotic and unpleasant and immoral life. Okay, he had a fateful propensity to alcohol, opium, and gambling. But he is very famous today in all sorts of circles. He was a man of great genius, endowed with a gift of analytical logic as well as sensitive imagination. And actually, a lot of his books circulate around the idea of murder and death. And all its forms are Poe's favourite themes. Okay, so the idea of madness. Did you know that one of the definitions of madness is a state of wild or chaotic activity? And it's still used today by many to reflect a lack of control and chaos, i.e. it's absolute madness at my house today. So historically and sometimes in modern times, wild or chaotic behaviour has often been associated with madness or somebody losing their mind. This becomes relevant in the story that we're going to read today and across this week. Okay? So, dissimulation. What I'd like you to do is I'd like you to copy the word and the definition into your book. Okay? It's a noun and it means concealment of one's thoughts, feelings or character. So the idea of pretense. You can turn it into a verb by using it, dissimulate. You can turn it into an adjective by using dissimulating, such as the dissimulating man. As a noun you would say an act of dissimulation. Okay? Can you think of any examples where you have practiced dissimulation? Where you've concealed your thoughts or feelings for either good or for bad reasons, perhaps? Okay. What we're going to do is we're going to break this story down into 3 parts, and I'm not going to give you the whole story. I'm just going to give you a little part of it. Okay, so I'm going to read the first part today, which really is just the first page, the shortest part of it itself, and I want you to ponder a few activities to build up your understanding, and then right at the end of this session I'd like you to predict what you think will happen next. Okay, so part 1 of the Telltale Heart. True, nervous, very, very dreadfully nervous, I had been and am. But why will you say that I am mad? The disease had sharpened my senses, not destroyed, not dulled them. Above all was the sense of hearing acute. I heard all things in the heaven and in the earth. I heard many things in hell. How then am I mad? Hearken, and observe how healthily, how calmly I can tell you the whole story. It is impossible to say how first the idea entered my brain, but once conceived it haunted me day and night. Object there was none, passion there was none. I loved the old man. He had never wronged me. He had never given me insult. For his gold I had no desire. I think it was his eye. Yes, it was this. He had the eye of a vulture, a pale blue eye with a film over it. Whenever it fell upon me, my blood ran cold, and so by degrees, very gradually, I made up my mind to take the life of the old man, and thus rid myself of that eye forever. Now this is the point. You fancy me mad. Madmen know nothing. But you should have seen me. You should have seen how wisely I proceeded, with what caution, with what foresight, with what dissimulation I went to work. I was never kinder to the old man than during the whole week before I killed him. And every night, about midnight, I turned the latch of his door and opened it, oh, so gently. And then, when I had made an opening sufficient for my head, I put in a dark lantern, all closed, that no light shone out. And then I thrust in my head. Oh, you would have laughed to see how cunningly I thrust it in. I moved it slowly, very, very slowly, so that I might not disturb the old man's sleep. It took me an hour to place my whole head within the opening so far that I could see him as he lay upon his bed. Ha! Would a madman been so wise as this? And then, when my head was well in the room, I undid the lantern cautiously, oh so cautiously, for the hinges creaked. I undid it just so much that a single thin ray fell upon the vulture eye. And this I did for 7 long nights, every night just at midnight. But I found the eye always closed, and so it was impossible to do the work, for it was not the old man who vexed me, but his evil eye. And every morning when the day broke, I went boldly into his chamber, and spoke courageously to him, calling him by name in a hearty tone, and inquiring how he has passed the night. So you see he would have been a very profound old man indeed to suspect that every night just at 12 I looked in upon him while he slept. Okay guys, so there's a copy of part 1 that I'm going to attach with the homework itself, okay? And what I'd like you to do is have that to hand and answer these quickfire comprehension questions, okay? I'd like you to pause the video here and write down the answers to those questions in your notes. Good luck. Okay, let's go through the answers. So what do we infer? What has happened to the narrator from the first few sentences that has sharpened his senses? So we infer that he suffered from a disease, but we don't know what disease it is. That seems to have affected his senses in some way. Does he really consider himself mad? No, because he believes he can tell his story calmly. What does the character intend to do to the old man? He intends to take his life, i.e. kill him. What is his motive for this deed? Because he doesn't like his eye. Peculiar motive indeed. How did the narrator treat the old man the week up until he killed him? With kindness. And finally, what did the narrator do for 7 long nights? Crept partly into his room and shone a ray of light from a lantern onto the old man's vulture eye. Very disturbing. Okay, so we've got a sense of what's going on. We've got this narrator who, for all appearances, seems pretty mad, who intends to kill an old man who lives in whatever building they both live in for some reason. Okay, so developing inference. The narrator says this: how then am I mad? Hearken and observe how healthily, how calmly I could tell you the whole story. But what I want you to think about is how does the writer hint that the narrator is mad? How does the writer give us clues as a reader that the narrator is clearly mad? Okay, and there are 3 things I want you to go through the text and consider. First one is on the final paragraph of part 1. Just count the number of exclamation marks. What might this suggest? Why are there that many? Secondly, I'd like you to identify any interjections, words like aha, oh, etc. Why has the writer included them? And then finally, identify any things the narrator says or does that doesn't seem rational or reasonable. Okay, pause the video here and go back to the text and consider those 3 ideas and identify those things. Okay, just a few, but not all reasons for. So there are 5, unless I'm really bad at counting, 5 exclamation marks in that final paragraph of part 1, which is quite a lot. to suggest excitable and frequently extreme feelings or emotions, and there's an implied sense of madness through this very flighty, emotional-type behaviour in this grown man. Okay, any interjections? There's quite a lot of ha and o, and the writer might have included these to indicate the chaotic mind of the narrator, to further imply that he's in the grip of madness. Okay. Finally, anything that he does or says that doesn't seem rational or reasonable. I've just put a few down, but there are more. His motive for murder is really irrational, not rational at all. His act of peering in the old man's room and shining a lantern on him is very peculiar behaviour, very unreasonable in many respects, and his constant desire to say he's not mad seems to be proof that he is mad, if anything, and also his sinister reasoning behind any actions that he takes are very, very peculiar, not entirely rational or reasonable. Okay, I'm sure you had more than that itself, and apologies for the typos on that slide. So, finally, next lesson, which will be Wednesday after the screen-free day, I want you to think about what will happen in part 2. Remember, we're breaking it down into 3 parts, okay? And this is the final clause of part 1 that we read today. I looked in upon him while he slept. Sinister, hey? What do you think will happen in part 2 and why? Also, remember that whatever you put is going to happen in part 2, there's going to be another part, so try and keep the bigger story in mind. So, copy and complete the following sentence. I think blank, 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 because blank. Okay? Alright guys, we're done today, and I shall see you or speak to you tomorrow.